First thing my stepmother did when my grandmother handed me that envelope was reach across the picnic table and slide it out from under my fingers. Oh, honey. She held it up to the late afternoon light the way you'd inspect a bill at a gas station you didn't trust. You do know these are worthless now, right? They stopped honoring these years ago. It's sweet, but it's basically a coupon for nothing. It was Labor Day weekend at the cottage my grandmother kept on the Leelanau Peninsula, a little gray shingled place that smelled like cedar and lake water and the same lavender hand soap she'd used my whole life. The grill was going. Somebody's kid was running circles around the fire pit. My father was on his third beer, laughing too loud at something my stepbrother said, and the surface of Lake Michigan out past the dune grass had gone that flat pewter color it gets right before sunset. My grandmother had handed out 4 envelopes that afternoon. One to me, one to my half-sister, one to my stepbrother, one that she set aside for my older brother, who hadn't come, because my older brother hadn't come to anything since he turned 19 and drove to Denver and basically never looked back. Inside mine was a stack of paper savings bonds, Series EE, the old kind, the heavy ones with the engraving and the little eagle. My name typed across the registration line. Face value adding up to $15,000. I sat there holding them and could not for the life of me remember the last time anyone in that family had handed me something that didn't have strings stapled to it. Then my stepmother took them out of my hands. My stepbrother didn't even open his. He glanced at the envelope, gave it a little flick, and tore it down the middle. Appreciate the thought, Gran, he said, mouth full of bratwurst. Maybe just Visa cards next time, yeah? The two halves fluttered onto his paper plate next to a smear of mustard. My half-sister looked at me, then at her mother, then folded her envelope into a tight little square and tucked it under the rim of her plate like she was hiding it from a teacher. I don't want to start anything, she said softly, mostly to herself. I looked at my grandmother. She was watching me, 83 years old, spine like a fence post, eyes that had spent 6 decades reading ledgers and library catalogs and the small print on every contract anyone ever pushed across a table at her. And just for a second so fast I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. She lifted one finger and pressed it to her lips, so I put the bonds back in the envelope, and I put the envelope in my jacket, and I said nothing. Nobody noticed. Nobody in that family ever noticed me. I'd made my peace with being the wallpaper a long time ago. Have you ever been the invisible one at your own family's table? Not because you were quiet, but because somebody decided a long time ago that you didn't count? If you have, you already know the strange thing about being invisible. People stop watching what you can see. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the little upstairs bedroom with the slanted ceiling, the one that had been my mother's when she was a girl, listening to the lake work at the dock pilings, and I turned that one sentence over and over. They stopped honoring these years ago. My stepmother had said it with such easy confidence, the confidence of someone who has never once been wrong in a way that cost her anything. Monday morning, I drove into town before anybody else was up. There's a credit union on the main drag, between a fudge shop and a bait store, and I sat in the parking lot until they unlocked the doors at 9. The teller was an older woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a coffee mug that said, World Us O'Case Gardener. I slid the bonds across the counter and asked her, straight out, if there was anything to them, or if I was holding a stack of expensive scrap paper. She picked one up, turned it over, typed for a while, frowned, typed some more. Then she looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as polite surprise. These are still earning, she said. Paper EE bonds accrue interest for 30 years. You're nowhere near that. You can redeem these whenever you want, or hold them and they keep growing. She slid them back. Whoever told you they were worthless was misinformed, or lying. Or lying. She didn't know how loud those 2 words landed. I sat in my car afterward with my forehead against the steering wheel and let myself shake for a minute, because if my stepmother had been lying about something this small and this checkable, then she'd been lying about everything, and I already knew which everything I meant. You have to understand how my family worked to understand why $15,000 in paper bonds made a grown woman cry in a credit union parking lot. My mother died when I was 12. She was an archivist. She spent her whole career at a county historical society, the kind of place nobody thinks about, cataloging deeds and church registers and the brittle diaries of dead farmers. And she used to take me to work with her and let me sit at the long oak table with white cotton gloves and turn pages older than the state. She'd say, a record doesn't argue with you. It just sits there and waits to be read by someone who's paying attention. She had a heart thing nobody caught in time. One Tuesday, she was helping me with a science fair poster, and the next Tuesday, she was gone, and the house got very quiet, and it more or less stayed that way. My father remarried 11 months later. My stepmother came from money old summer people money, the kind that talks about being comfortable while pricing out yacht club memberships, and she came with a son 2 years older than me. My stepbrother got the lacrosse camps, the tutors, the used BMW that wasn't really that used. I got a library card and a reminder that, quote, college wasn't for everybody and there was no shame in trades. I went anyway. State school, financial aid, a part-time job scanning microfilm because it was the only thing that felt like my mother. I studied library and information science, and then I specialized, almost by accident, in something most people don't know exists: document authentication. Archives, provenance, forensic examination of paper and ink and type. The unglamorous work of figuring out whether a thing is what it claims to be. For the last few years, I've been doing it for a living, half at a small regional archive, half freelance, getting hired by the occasional museum or law firm or estate to look at a letter or a deed or a will and tell them, with reasons, real or fake. In my family, I was the one who's good with old papers. Said the way you'd say someone was good at keeping the gutters clean, a chore that had a person attached to it. 3 years ago, I asked my father for help. One time, I was 28, living in a rented half of a duplex 2 states away, and my car had thrown a transmission, and I needed $2,000. I didn't have to keep getting to work. I called him. He leaned back in that leather chair in the study my stepmother had redone in walnut and oil paintings of sailboats. Nobody in the family had ever sailed. I could hear in his voice, the leather creaking, and he said, "We'd love to, sweetheart, but money's a little tight right now. You understand. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out." Money was tight. He told me that on a Wednesday. That Saturday, my stepbrother posted 41 photos from a villa in Tulum, and in the caption, he thanked mom and dad for the best birthday trip ever. They didn't even hide it. Why would they? They genuinely did not believe I was paying attention. And that's the thing they never understood about what I do for a living. Paying attention is the entire job. It was the only thing my mother ever really left me. That and the bonds I didn't even know about yet. I found out about the trust by accident. About 2 years ago, a piece of mail showed up at my grandmother's house with my name on it, forwarded from an old address, and my grandmother set it aside and gave it to me the next time I visited. It was a statement from a trust company I'd never heard of. My maternal great-grandmother, my mother's grandmother, a woman I barely remembered, who'd had a little money from selling cherry orchards back when the peninsula was all cherry orchards, had set up a trust. For me, to be released when I turned 25, the statement showed a balance of just under $540,000. I was 29 when that letter reached me. I had never seen a single cent. I had never even been told it existed. When I asked my father, he didn't blink. He had clearly rehearsed it, or rehearsed something like it, a long time ago. That was restructured years back, he said. We rolled it into a family management account. More tax efficient. Your stepmother and I oversee it on your behalf. When the timing's right, we'll distribute it. He said when the timing's right, the way you talk to a child asking when you'd be there yet. I asked to see statements. He said the advisor would send them. They never came. I asked again. He said he'd look into it. I asked a third time, and my stepmother caught me in the kitchen, put one cool manicured hand on my arm, and said, "Honey, your father and I have protected that money for you because, frankly, you don't have the head for this kind of thing. You catalog old papers. This is real money. Let the adults handle it." I stopped asking out loud. I did not stop counting in my head. The math wasn't hard. My stepbrother's failed food truck, his athleisure brand that never produced a single shirt, the crypto thing that lasted exactly one autumn, my half-sister's private college, the new dock, the new kitchen, the trips. $540,000 goes fast when 4 people are spending it and one person earned it 80 years ago, and the only person it actually belongs to is 2 states away scanning microfilm. So when the credit union teller said, or lying, I drove straight from that parking lot to my grandmother's real house, not the cottage where the family was staying, but her actual home, a tidy brick place up the hill behind a row of paper birches. So quiet you could hear the clock and the front hall tick. She was at her desk with a legal pad and a cup of black coffee, and she didn't turn around when I came in. "You went to the credit union," she said. "They're real, Gran, the bonds. 15,000 and growing." My voice cracked on growing. She lied to my face in front of everyone. and nobody even blinked. Of course she lied. My grandmother turned then. She didn't look frail. She looked like someone who'd been waiting a long time for the right person to walk through her door. I gave you those bonds on purpose, you understand. I needed to see her do it in front of witnesses. I needed to see if she'd lie about something that small and that easy to check. Because if she'll lie about $15,000 of paper, I already know what she's done with the rest. I sat down across from her. You know about the trust. I've suspected for 2 years, since that letter found its way to you. She folded her hands. Your father told me you signed a deferral, signed away your right to take distribution until some later date. He showed me a letter with your signature on it. I never signed anything. I believe you, but believing isn't proof, and proof is the only thing that's going to matter. She leaned forward. Here's my problem. Your stepmother has been working on my attorney for 2 years, dropping little comments. Have you noticed she repeats herself? Should someone be helping her with decisions? She is building a case that I'm slipping, so that the day I try to do anything she doesn't like, she can waive a doctor's note and a conservatorship petition and take the wheel before I can stop her. If I accuse them of stealing your trust without ironclad evidence, that's exactly the opening she's waiting for. I need them to hand me the rope. How would they do that? My grandmother smiled, and it was not a sweet old lady smile. It was the smile of a woman who had buried a husband, outlasted 2 recessions, and spent her whole life being underestimated by men who were wrong. By proving the trust still exists, she said. Because it doesn't. And the only way to prove a thing that doesn't exist is to make something. And the one thing nobody in that family remembers is that you, my dear, can tell the difference between a real document and a made-up one in your sleep. She picked up the phone. I want to be clear that I tried, in that moment, to talk her out of it. I said it would blow up the family. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said the family had already blown up years ago, and the only question left was who got to stand in the crater. Then she dialed my father, put it on speaker, and became a completely different person. The voice that came out of her was thin and a little wavering. An old woman's voice, fond and confused at the edges. It was a performance so good, it scared me. She told my father she'd been thinking about her own mortality, that she didn't want us kids fighting over the estate when she was gone, that she wanted to restructure everything now, while she could still understand it, and move the big assets into a new family trust, with him and my stepmother as co-trustees. I heard my father suck in a breath. I heard the leather creak. Mom, he said, and his voice had gone warm and careful, the voice of a man trying not to spook a deal. That's really generous. We can come up this week. Not yet, my grandmother said. My attorney wants a clean accounting first. Everything on the table, so it's all proper, including that little trust your daughter has, the one from my mother's side who'll want to see that it's all been managed correctly before we fold things together. Just to keep the lawyers happy. Bring it all to his office Friday morning. Once he signs off, we move ahead. Of course, my father said, and I could hear it underneath, the greed humming in his throat like a held note. We've got everything organized. No problem at all. She hung up and looked at me. Now, she said, we wait, and you watch. Here is the part nobody planned for, except in the sense that my whole life had been quietly planning for it. 6 years ago, my stepmother had a panic at 11 o'clock at night because she could not figure out how to scan and upload the family's old photo albums and documents to share with relatives. So she called me, the one who's good with old papers, and I built it for her. A shared cloud archive, digitized photos, scanned letters, deeds, the family records, all of it neatly folded, with my account as the administrator because somebody had to maintain it, and that somebody was always me. They never revoked my access. Why would they? I was furniture with a login. You don't change the locks on the room you keep the furniture in. So on Tuesday afternoon, I opened that shared drive on my laptop and I sat there, and for the better part of a day, nothing happened. Then at 10:51 on Wednesday night, the files started arriving. I watched the activity feed scroll like a slow alarm. Trust us summary Dave Raft .docx added by my father's account. Letterhead soccersample.png added by my stepmother's account. Trust us summary us sucker v2 .docx. Trust us summary us sucker fidel .docx. Acknowledgement soccerscan.pdf added. Then trust us summary us stalker raft .docs remove. Trust Summary UMSR v2.docx removed. They were building it from scratch in real time, drafting and deleting, because there was nothing to copy from, because the original was gone, because the money was gone. They didn't know the drive kept a full version history of everything. They didn't know deleted files sat in a recovery folder for 30 days. They didn't know because they'd never once had to think about how any of it worked. That was always my job. At 1:34 on Thursday morning, the last file landed. Trust Statement succerfied.pdf. I downloaded it and I made myself a cup of tea and I opened it the way I'd open anything a client handed me and swore was genuine. To a regular person, it was beautiful. Trust company letterhead at the top, crisp and official. A current balance of $540,000. A schedule of holdings. Quarterly statements going back years. A trustee certification at the bottom and a notary's acknowledgement with the stamp and the signature, all dated 3 years ago, all swearing the trust was healthy and intact and properly managed. But I am not a regular person, and a document is not words and numbers to me. It's an object with a history, and objects have grain, and the grain either runs true or it doesn't. I started with the letterhead, because the letterhead was the first thing that felt wrong, and it took me a second to understand why. The logo. That trust company had rebranded. I knew because I'd actually looked them up 2 years ago when the real statement surfaced. They'd changed their logo from a serif word mark to a clean little compass mark. The change had happened last year. And here is a document supposedly printed and notarized 3 years ago wearing a logo that wouldn't exist for another 2. They'd gone to the company's current website, grabbed the current letterhead, and dropped it onto a document they were backdating. It was like a forger painting a 1950s portrait and putting a smartphone in the subject's pocket. That alone would have ended it. But I kept going, because my mother taught me you don't stop at the first crack. You map every one of them so that when you're across the table from someone who's going to lie about it, you've got more than they've got energy to deny. I checked the type. The real trust company used a specific typeface in its statements. I had the genuine one from 2 years back, and I pulled it up side by side. Theirs used it for everything. A particular humanist sans for the body, with their footnotes in a smaller weight. The fake used 12-point Times New Roman top to bottom. The default. The font a document is wearing when nobody dressed it. To anyone who knows, that's showing up to a black tie estate dinner in gym shorts. Then the notary. This is the part that made me actually laugh out loud alone at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning. The notarial acknowledgement had a commission number and a commission expiration date stamped right there. Notary commissions are public record in this state. You can search them. Anybody can. The registry is right there on the Secretary of State's site. I typed the number in. The commission belonged to a real notary, all right. A notary whose commission had expired 4 months before the date on the document. You cannot notarize anything on a commission that's already dead. They'd used some old stamp or invented a number close to a real one and never thought to check, because checking is what I do, and I wasn't supposed to be in the room. Then the numbers themselves, because of course I checked the numbers. The quarterly statements listed holdings and returns. I cross-referenced the funds they'd named against publicly published performance. Close, but never exact. A bond fund they listed at a return that was a quarter point off the real figure. An equity fund off by nearly half a point. Whoever made it had eyeballed plausible numbers instead of looking up real ones because they were thinking like people who lie, not like a machine that reconciles. Real statements tie out to the penny. Theirs had a gap of a few $100s between a reinvested dividend and the balance it was supposed to flow into. Software doesn't make that mistake. People making things up at 1 in the morning do. And then, last, the metadata. I right-clicked, opened the document properties, and there it was, glowing, created 2 nights ago, modified at 1:31 in the morning, authored in a word processor on a device whose name was my stepmother's first initial and last name, followed by the word surface. A trust company generates statements out of its own reporting system. It does not author them in Word at 1 in the morning on a personal laptop 2 days before a legal review. I saved all of it. The fake PDF. The version history from the shared drive showing every draft and deletion with names and timestamps. The recovered deleted files. The metadata report. The screenshots of the rebranded logo with the dates circled. The notary registry page. The fund comparison. I put every piece on an encrypted drive and locked it in the glove box of my car. And then I called my grandmother even though it was almost 3 in the morning because I knew she'd be awake. They used last year's logo on a 3-year-old document, I said, and the notary's commission was already expired. There was a pause, and then my grandmother laughed, a real one, full and delighted, the sound of a woman who had been waiting decades for somebody in her family to finally do the homework. Friday morning, then, she said. The attorney's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, the kind of law office that hadn't been redecorated since the 90s forest green carpet. Framed certificates, a long conference table that could seat 12 and almost never did. Friday morning, it seated 7, the attorney at the head, my grandmother to his right, me down in the corner by the wall-mounted monitor with my laptop bag on my knees, because in their eyes, I wasn't a participant, I was tech support, the girl who'd come to plug in the screen. At 10 sharp, the door opened, and in came my father, my stepmother, and my stepbrother. My stepmother in a cream blazer and diamond studs, my father in his good navy suit, my stepbrother behind them in a sport coat that still had the size sticker on the sleeve. They walked in the way you walk into a closing when you think you're about to collect. They did not look at me. I was the extension cord. The attorney thanked everyone for coming and explained that before any restructuring, my grandmother had asked for a full review of the trust and that he understood the documentation had been brought. My father set a leather portfolio on the table. It landed with a soft, expensive thud. "It's all here," he said with a smile so confident it was almost rude. "Managed conservatively. Balance is strong. Her money's been safe the whole time." He nodded toward me without looking at me. "Safe and sound." "My eyes aren't what they were," my grandmother said in the wavering voice. "The performance. Honey, would you put it up on the screen so I can follow along?" Nice and large. My father waved a hand at me like he was excusing a waiter. My stepmother leaned over and said, "Low. Just the summary page, sweetheart. Don't make a project of it." "Sure," I said. "I'm good with documents." I connected my laptop. I put their PDF up on the screen, and there it was, 8 feet wide, $540,000, the letterhead, the notary stamp, the whole forged thing glowing on the wall. "As you can see," my father started, "everything's in." "Actually," I said, "since this is a formal review, I'd like to walk through a few things." My father shifted in his chair. My stepmother's jaw set, but they couldn't say no. Not in front of the attorney. Not without looking like people with something to hide. "Of course," my stepmother said, through a smile you could have cut glass with. I started with the logo. I put the document on the left and the trust company's current website on the right. "This statement is dated 3 years ago," I said, "but it's using this logo. The company only adopted this logo last year. You can pull up the press release. They announced the rebrand 14 months ago. So a document dated 3 years ago is wearing a logo that didn't exist yet." I let it sit. Paper can't time travel. The room got very quiet. I moved to the notary. I put the Secretary of State's public registry up on screen and typed in the commission number from the acknowledgement. "This is the notary whose stamp is on this document. Their commission expired here." I highlighted the date. 4 months before the date this was supposedly notarized. A notarization on an expired commission isn't valid. It isn't even legal. My stepmother's face had gone a color I'd never seen on her. Not pale. Gray. Like wet cement. I moved to the type. The fund returns. The few $100 gap that software would never produce. And then I opened the document properties and put the metadata on the wall, 8 feet tall, for everyone to read. "This file was created 2 nights ago," I said. "Modified at 1:31 in the morning. Authored in a word processor on a device registered to—" I read the device name aloud. The one with my stepmother's name in it. "A trust company doesn't make statements in Word at 1 in the morning on somebody's personal laptop 2 days before a legal review." I turned to my father. He wouldn't look at me. "You didn't manage the trust," I said. "You spent it, and when somebody finally asked you to prove it was still there, you built a fake in Word, filled it with numbers you guessed at, dressed it in a logo from the wrong year, and stamped it with a notary commission that was already dead. Because the only person in this family who could ever catch it is the one you've been calling good with old papers for 10 years, like it was a way to fold laundry." My stepmother came up out of her chair. "This is absurd," she's twisting. "The data's on the screen," the attorney said, and his voice was quiet and absolutely lethal. The metadata is from your own device. The notary record is public. The logo is dated. And you brought this into my office and represented it as accurate. Do you understand what that means? Silence. And then my father cleared his throat, and his voice came out as barely a whisper. We had some cash flow problems, he said. A few years ago, we borrowed against it. We always meant to put it back. How much did you put back? The attorney asked. My father said nothing. How much? My grandmother said. The wavering was gone. Her voice was a steel rail. How much, son? None of it, he finally said. Living expenses. His ventures. A small, terrible gesture at my stepbrother. The house. We were going. He didn't finish. Because there was nothing to finish. The attorney opened a folder he and my grandmother had clearly prepared in advance. I'd never seen it. He read from it. My grandmother's estate plan, he said, contained a standard clause. Any beneficiary found to have committed fraud, forgery, or misrepresentation against the estate or its trusts forfeited their entire share, and the forfeited share was redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries. He set it down. You submitted a forged document to this office, he said. You confessed, on the record, to misappropriating roughly $500,000 from a protected trust. Under the terms of the estate plan, your combined share is now void. He paused. I'll also mention that copies of the metadata, the cloud version history, the notary record, and the fund comparison were forwarded this morning to a forensic accountant at the prosecutor's office. Whether charges follow is up to them. My stepbrother shoved back from the table so hard his chair hit the wall. I didn't do anything. I never touched the trust. You spent it, I said. The food truck. The brand. The crypto. I didn't even raise my voice. That was my inheritance funding all of it. You just never asked where the money came from. My father turned to my grandmother, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched my father's face come apart. Mom, please, we're your family. My grandmother stood up. She is 5'1" and 83 years old, and in that room she was the tallest person in it by a mile. She is my family, she said, and she nodded at me. She has been cleaning up after the rest of you for 10 years. She built your files. She scanned your photographs. She fixed everything you broke and never once got thanked for it. And you paid her back by stealing what her own mother's family left her and telling her she was too simple to notice. She looked at me. She noticed. Somebody from the firm walked them out. At the door, my stepmother stopped and grabbed my arm, and her nails went in, and she put her mouth close to my ear and hissed that I was nothing, that I would always be nothing. I took her hand off my arm. Gently, the way you close a brittle ledger at the end of a long day so the spine doesn't crack. I just needed to be right, I said. I was. The door closed. That evening, my grandmother and I sat on her back porch and watched the light go down over the birches. And the lake gave off that cold pine and water smell. And somewhere out on the water, a loon made that sound that always feels like it's grieving for you so you don't have to. You're grieving? She said. I am. I was. Not for the money. I think I lost the idea of a father today. The one I kept hoping was in there somewhere. She put her hand over mine, the skin of it thin as the old paper my mother used to let me hold. Your mother would be unbearable right now, she said. She'd be so proud of you, she'd be insufferable about it for a week. She squeezed once. She always said you understood the thing most people never do. That love isn't a feeling people announce. It's a record. And the people who actually love you are the ones whose accounts come out clean when you finally go through the books. It took the better part of a year. The trust was eventually made whole again out of frozen assets and a forced sale of the boat and the dock, and most of what my stepmother liked to call comfortable. The prosecutor's office did file. My father pleaded out restitution, probation, his name in the small print of the local paper he used to read at breakfast. My stepmother fought it, because of course she did, and lost, because the metadata doesn't change its story under cross-examination the way people do. My stepbrother wasn't charged, but the forfeiture clause held and he got nothing, which he kept calling unfair to anyone who'd listen. My half-sister called me once crying to say she was sorry she'd hidden her envelope under her plate that day instead of saying something. I told her she'd been a kid trying to survive the same house I'd tried to survive, and I meant it. We talk now a little. It's getting better. My older brother sent one text from Denver that just said good, and I knew exactly what he meant. I quit the regional archive. I rented a small office above a bookshop in town with a window that looks out over the water, and I hung up a shingle for document, authentication, and forensic records work. The unglamorous business of telling people whether a thing is what it claims to be. My first real client was a woman whose ex-husband had buried assets all through their divorce behind a shell company registered sloppily to his mother's address. I found it in 4 days. The look on her face was worth more than the fee. My father called last month. I let it ring out and I looked at his name on the screen for a long time. Then I turned the phone face down on my mother's old oak work table, the one I'd had hauled out of storage and set up under the window. And I put my cotton gloves back on and I went back to the page in front of me. A record doesn't argue with you. It doesn't beg and it doesn't perform and it doesn't tell you it loves you while it empties your account. It just sits there, patient, true to the day it was made, and waits for someone who's actually paying attention to come along and read it. I was paying attention. I always was.